The morning sun cast long shadows across the Naval Special Warfare Training Center in Coronado, California, as another group of hopeful SEAL candidates began their journey through hell. Danny Martinez wiped sweat from his forehead and checked his watch for the 100th time that morning. 5:30 a.m. and the instructors were already pushing them harder than most people could handle in a full day. This was his second attempt at SEAL training. The first time, he had failed during Hell Week when his body simply gave out during the endless hours of cold, wet misery that broke most men who tried. Now he was back, older, wiser, and more determined than ever. At 24, Danny knew this might be his last chance to achieve his dream of becoming a Navy SEAL. The training facility buzzed with constant activity. Instructors shouted commands while recruits ran, crawled, and struggled through obstacle courses designed to push human limits. The smell of salt water mixed with sweat filled the air as waves crashed against the nearby beach where much of their ocean training took place. Among all this chaos and noise, there was one person who moved quietly through the base like a ghost. Henry Stone was the janitor, an elderly man who had worked at the facility for 15 years according to the other staff. He looked to be in his 70s with gray hair and weathered skin that spoke of a long life. Henry wore simple work clothes and moved slowly as he cleaned the buildings, emptied trash cans, and maintained the equipment areas. Most of the recruits barely noticed Henry. They were too focused on surviving each day to pay attention to the cleaning staff. But Danny had always been observant, and during his first attempt at training, he had started noticing the old man during his late-night study sessions in the classroom building. While other recruits slept or tried to recover from the day's punishment, Danny often stayed up late reviewing training manuals and studying everything he could about naval warfare, weapons systems, and combat tactics. He wanted to be ready for anything the instructors might throw at them. During these quiet hours, Henry would appear with his cleaning cart, moving through the hallways like a quiet shadow. The old man never disturbed Danny's studying. He would simply nod politely if their eyes met and continue with his work. There was something peaceful about Henry's presence that Danny found comforting during the stressful weeks of training. While everything else at the base was loud, aggressive, and designed to break people down, Henry represented a calm constant in the storm. Danny had tried making conversation with Henry a few times, but the old man seemed shy and didn't say much beyond basic greetings. He spoke with a slight accent that Danny couldn't quite place, and his voice was soft and careful. Henry would answer simple questions about the weather, or how long he had worked at the base, but he never volunteered personal information about himself. The other cleaning staff seemed to respect Henry, but they didn't appear to know much about his background either. When Danny asked one of the other janitors about Henry's history, the man just shrugged and said Henry kept to himself and did good work. Some of the instructors had mentioned that Henry had been there longer than anyone could remember, and that he was reliable and trustworthy. During Danny's current second attempt at training, he found himself paying even more attention to the quiet janitor. There was something about Henry that seemed different from other elderly workers Danny had met. The old man moved with a strange kind of grace despite his age, and his eyes held an intelligence that seemed almost out of place for someone in such a humble job. One evening, as Danny struggled through a particularly difficult chapter about underwater demolition techniques, Henry appeared in the classroom as usual. The old man began cleaning the whiteboards and organizing the chairs that had been scattered during the day's lessons. Danny looked up from his book and noticed Henry pausing to read some of the tactical diagrams that had been drawn on the boards. For just a moment, Danny saw something flicker across Henry's face. It wasn't confusion or curiosity like most people might show when looking at military tactical information. Instead, there was a brief flash of recognition, as if Henry understood exactly what he was looking at. The expression was gone so quickly that Danny almost thought he had imagined it. When Henry noticed Danny watching him, the old man quickly returned to his cleaning and moved on to another part of the room. But the moment stuck with Danny, and he began wondering what Henry's background might be before he started working at the base. The training days continued to blur together in a haze of physical and mental challenges. Danny and his fellow recruits were pushed to their limits and beyond, as they learned everything from basic marksmanship to advanced combat swimming. The instructors showed no mercy, constantly reminding them that real combat would be far worse than anything they experienced in training. Through it all, Henry continued his quiet work around the base. Danny started noticing small things about the old man that seemed unusual. Henry never appeared to be truly tired, even after long days of physical work that would exhaust most people his age. His movements were always precise and controlled, without the shakiness or uncertainty that often came with advanced years. There were also moments when Henry seemed to notice things that others missed. During emergency drills, when alarms would sound throughout the base, Henry always seemed to know what was happening before anyone explained it to him. He would calmly secure his equipment and move to appropriate areas without needing direction from the staff. Danny began to suspect that Henry might be a military veteran himself. That would explain his familiarity with tactical concepts and his calm response to base operations. Many veterans took civilian jobs at military facilities after their service ended, finding comfort in staying connected to the military community even after retirement. But when Danny tried to ask subtle questions about military service, Henry would deflect them with the skill of someone who had practice avoiding personal topics. The old man never directly denied having military experience, but he also never confirmed it. He would simply change the subject or mention that he needed to get back to his work. As weeks passed and Danny's training progressed, he found himself looking forward to his late-night encounters with Henry. There was something reassuring about the old man's steady presence during the most stressful period of Danny's life. While everything else about SEAL training was designed to create chaos and pressure, Henry represented stability and calm. Danny began to think of Henry as a good luck charm of sorts. On nights when the studying was particularly difficult, or when Danny felt overwhelmed by the demands of training, seeing Henry quietly going about his work reminded him that there were people who had been through challenges before and survived to tell about. Yet little did Danny know that his instincts about Henry were more accurate than he could possibly imagine, and that the quiet old janitor was hiding secrets that would soon change everything Danny thought he knew about the world. The fourth week of training brought new levels of exhaustion that Danny had never experienced before. The instructors seemed determined to break every recruit who wasn't absolutely committed to becoming a SEAL. Sleep became a luxury measured in minutes rather than hours, and every muscle in Danny's body ached from the constant physical demands. It was during a particularly brutal equipment maintenance drill that Danny's world began to change in ways he could never have expected. The recruits had been working since 4 a.m, cleaning and inspecting every piece of gear in the training facility. The instructors demanded perfection, and any mistake meant starting over from the beginning. Danny was assigned to the equipment shed, a large building filled with diving gear, weapons, and specialized tools used in various training exercises. The shed was hot and cramped with poor ventilation that made the work even more miserable. By afternoon, Danny was fighting to stay conscious as heat exhaustion began to take its toll. He had been checking pressure gauges on diving tanks when the world started spinning around him. Danny tried to steady himself against a workbench, but his legs gave out and he collapsed onto the concrete floor. The impact sent stars shooting across his vision as his head struck the ground. For several moments, Danny lay there struggling to regain his senses. The shed seemed to be spinning slowly around him, and he could taste blood where he had bitten his tongue during the fall. He knew he needed to get up and continue working before an instructor found him, but his body refused to cooperate. That was when he heard footsteps approaching across the concrete floor. Danny expected to see boots belonging to an angry instructor, who would probably make his life even more miserable for showing weakness. Instead, he found himself looking up at the worn work shoes that belonged to Henry Stone. The old janitor knelt beside Danny with surprising speed and grace for someone his age. Henry's weathered hands gently helped Danny sit up, checking for injuries with the practiced efficiency of someone who had dealt with medical emergencies before. His touch was steady and confident, not the uncertain fumbling Danny might have expected from an elderly civilian worker. "Easy there, son," Henry said softly, his voice carrying a warmth that Danny had rarely heard from anyone at the base. "You pushed yourself too hard in this heat." As Henry helped him to his feet, Danny noticed that the old man was wearing a short-sleeved work shirt instead of his usual long-sleeved uniform. The change in clothing revealed something that made Danny's exhausted mind struggle to process what he was seeing. On Henry's left forearm was a tattoo unlike anything Danny had ever encountered. At first glance, it appeared to be made up of geometric patterns that seemed to shift and flow across the old man's skin. The lines were not static like normal tattoos, but appeared to move in subtle ways that hurt Danny's eyes to follow for too long. The design incorporated symbols and characters that definitely did not belong to any human language or writing system Danny knew. Some of the marks resembled mathematical equations, while others looked almost like star charts or technical diagrams. The entire tattoo seemed to pulse with a very faint light that was barely visible in the dim shed lighting. What made the tattoo even more remarkable was how it seemed to respond to Danny's attention. When he focused on different sections of the design, those areas would brighten slightly, as if the tattoo was somehow aware of where he was looking. The effect was so subtle that Danny began to wonder if his heat exhaustion was causing hallucinations. "What is that?" Danny asked, his voice barely above a whisper as he stared at the impossible artwork on Henry's arm. Henry followed Danny's gaze and immediately pulled his sleeve down to cover the tattoo. For just a moment, Danny saw something flash across the old man's face that looked almost like panic. It was the first time he had ever seen Henry appear anything other than completely calm and controlled. "Just something from a long time ago," Henry replied, his voice carefully neutral as he helped Danny steady himself against the workbench. "Nothing important." But Danny had seen enough to know that whatever was on Henry's arm was definitely not a normal tattoo. The way it had moved and responded to light was beyond anything current tattoo technology could produce. The symbols were unlike anything he had studied in his extensive military education, and the overall design suggested knowledge of concepts that seemed far beyond what an elderly janitor should possess. "I've never seen anything like that before," Danny said, trying to keep his voice casual despite his growing curiosity. "Where did you get it done?" Henry was already moving toward the shed door, clearly uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation. He paused and looked back at Danny with an expression that seemed to carry warning along with concern. "Some things are better left alone, son," Henry said quietly. "Focus on your training and forget what you think you saw." With that, the old janitor disappeared out the door, leaving Danny alone in the equipment shed with 100 new questions racing through his mind. The encounter had lasted less than 5 minutes, but it had fundamentally changed how Danny viewed the quiet man who cleaned their training facility. Over the following days, Danny found himself paying even closer attention to Henry's behavior around the base. The old man continued his work as usual, but Danny noticed that he was now more careful to keep his arms covered at all times. Henry also seemed to avoid making direct eye contact with Danny during their brief encounters in the hallways. Danny tried to research tattoo technologies that might explain what he had seen, using his limited free time to search through military databases and technical journals. He found information about experimental designs that incorporated LED lights or special inks that could change color, but nothing that matched the fluid, responsive patterns he had witnessed on Henry's arm. The symbols bothered him even more than the technology. Danny had studied multiple languages and writing systems as part of his military training, and he prided himself on being able to identify most forms of human communication. But the characters in Henry's tattoo were completely foreign to anything in his experience. He began sketching what he could remember of the symbols during his study sessions, trying to recreate the patterns and shapes he had glimpsed. The more he drew, the more convinced he became that the designs were not random artistic choices but represented some form of actual language or technical notation. Danny also started paying attention to other details about Henry that he had previously overlooked. The old man's tools and equipment always seemed to be in perfect condition, despite their apparent age. Henry's work cart moved too smoothly and quietly for something that should have been worn down by years of use. Even his cleaning supplies seemed to work more effectively than they should have. Most unsettling of all was the way Henry sometimes paused in his work, as if he was listening to sounds that no one else could hear. During these moments, the old man would become completely still and focused, his head tilted slightly as if straining to catch distant voices or signals. When the episodes ended, Henry would continue his work as if nothing had happened. Danny began to suspect that Henry was involved in some kind of classified government work that required him to maintain a cover identity as a janitor. That would explain the advanced technology in his tattoo, and his obvious familiarity with military operations. It might also explain why he was so reluctant to discuss his background or personal history, but even that theory had problems. Government contractors usually had some kind of official documentation or security clearance that would be visible to trained military personnel. Henry seemed to operate completely outside any official channels, with a freedom of movement that suggested he answered to no earthly authority. As Danny's training progressed and his physical condition improved, he found himself becoming obsessed with solving the mystery of Henry Stone. The old janitor represented a puzzle that challenged everything Danny thought he knew about the world, and the more he investigated, the more questions arose. Little did Danny realize that his curiosity was about to lead him into discoveries that would change not only his understanding of Henry, but his entire concept of humanity's place in the universe. 3 weeks had passed since Danny first glimpsed Henry's mysterious tattoo, and the incident had never left his thoughts. The old janitor continued his quiet work around the base, but their interactions had become more distant and formal. Danny suspected that Henry was deliberately avoiding him, which only increased his curiosity about what the old man might be hiding. The morning of the accident started like any other training day. Danny and his fellow recruits were scheduled for ocean conditioning exercises, which meant hours of swimming, treading water, and practicing underwater techniques in the Pacific surf off Coronado Beach. The instructors had warned them that the conditions were challenging, with larger waves than usual and strong currents that would test their abilities. Kyle Brooks was one of the newer recruits in Danny's class, a 22-year-old from Ohio who had joined the Navy straight out of college. Kyle was smart and determined, but he struggled with the water-based training more than most of the other candidates. Growing up in the Midwest had not given him much experience with ocean swimming, and the powerful Pacific surf was proving to be a constant challenge. The training exercise began at dawn with the usual routine of calisthenics on the beach, followed by a long swim parallel to the shoreline. The instructors positioned themselves at various points to monitor the recruits and provide assistance if needed. But the nature of SEAL training meant that candidates were expected to handle most situations on their own. Danny was swimming about 50 yards from shore when he heard shouting from the direction of the beach. He paused in the water and looked around to locate the source of the commotion. What he saw made his blood run cold with fear and concern. Kyle Brooks was in serious trouble about 100 yards down the beach from the main group. He had been caught by a powerful riptide that was pulling him away from shore faster than he could swim against it. Kyle was fighting desperately to return to the beach, but the current was too strong, and his panic was causing him to waste energy with inefficient movements. The instructors were responding to the emergency, but they were positioned too far away to reach Kyle quickly. Danny could see them running along the beach and calling for additional support, but it would take several minutes for them to get rescue equipment into the water. By then, Kyle might be too exhausted to help with his own rescue, or the riptide might have carried him even further from shore. Danny started swimming toward Kyle's position, knowing that he probably could not fight the current either, but unwilling to watch a fellow recruit drown without trying to help. As he struggled through the churning surf, Danny realized that the situation was rapidly becoming hopeless. The riptide was incredibly powerful, and Kyle was already showing signs of complete exhaustion. That was when Danny saw something that defied everything he thought he knew about physics and human capability. Henry Stone appeared at the water's edge directly opposite Kyle's position. The old janitor had somehow arrived at the exact right spot on the beach without any of the running or searching that had delayed the instructors. He stood calmly for a moment, assessing the situation with the practiced eye of someone who had dealt with water rescues before. Then Henry did something that should have been impossible for any 70-year-old human being. Without hesitation or apparent concern for his own safety, the old man dove into the violent surf with the fluid grace of an Olympic swimmer half his age. What happened next challenged Danny's understanding of what the human body could accomplish. Henry moved through the water with speed that seemed to defy the laws of physics. He cut through the waves like they offered no resistance at all, maintaining a straight line toward Kyle despite the chaotic cross-currents that were making Danny struggle just to stay in position. The distance that should have taken several minutes of hard swimming for even the best athletes was covered by Henry in what seemed like seconds. Danny watched in amazement as the old janitor reached Kyle's position and smoothly took control of the panicking recruit without any apparent effort. Henry's rescue technique was unlike anything taught in standard lifeguard training. Instead of fighting against the riptide, he seemed to work with the current in ways that used its power to their advantage. Kyle stopped struggling immediately when Henry reached him, as if the old man possessed some kind of natural authority that commanded instant trust and cooperation. The return trip to shore was even more remarkable than Henry's initial approach. Despite carrying an exhausted recruit who was dead weight in the water, Henry moved back toward the beach with the same impossible speed he had demonstrated on the way out. The waves that had been battering Danny and creating dangerous conditions seemed to part around Henry and Kyle like they were swimming through calm water. Danny watched the entire rescue unfold in stunned silence. What should have been a desperate struggle against powerful natural forces had become a smooth, controlled operation that looked almost effortless. Henry brought Kyle safely to shore in less time than it would have taken most people to swim the same distance under perfect conditions. When they reached the beach, Henry helped Kyle to his feet and checked him for injuries with the same gentle efficiency Danny had experienced in the equipment shed. The rescued recruit was coughing up seawater and shivering from cold and shock, but he was clearly going to be fine thanks to Henry's intervention. The instructors finally arrived with rescue equipment just as Henry was finishing his examination of Kyle. They immediately took charge of the medical situation, checking vital signs and preparing to transport Kyle to the base medical facility for observation. In the confusion and activity that followed, Henry quietly disappeared from the scene before anyone could question him about his remarkable rescue. Danny remained in the water for several more minutes, treading water and trying to process what he had witnessed. The other recruits and instructors were focused on Kyle's condition and the aftermath of the emergency, so no one else seemed to have paid close attention to the details of Henry's rescue technique. When Danny finally returned to shore, he asked some of the other recruits if they had seen how quickly Henry had reached Kyle in the water. Most of them had been too far away or too focused on their own swimming to notice the specifics of the rescue. Those who had seen anything reported that the old janitor had helped with the emergency, but their descriptions were vague and did not capture the impossible aspects of Henry's performance. The instructors debriefed the incident as they always did after any training emergency. They praised Henry's quick thinking and willingness to help, noting that his civilian status made his actions particularly commendable. But their official reports focused on the rescue outcome rather than the methods used, and they seemed to have missed the extraordinary nature of Henry's capabilities. Over the following days, Danny replayed the rescue in his mind countless times, trying to find some rational explanation for what he had witnessed. He researched ocean rescue techniques, human swimming speeds, and the effects of adrenaline on physical performance, but nothing he found could account for Henry's abilities in the water. The more Danny thought about the rescue, the more convinced he became that Henry was not entirely human. The tattoo, the mysterious background, and now the impossible physical capabilities all pointed toward something far beyond normal human experience. Danny began to suspect that he had stumbled onto a secret that could change everything he thought he knew about the world. But he also realized that approaching Henry directly with his suspicions could be dangerous. If the old janitor was indeed something other than human, there was no telling how he might react to being discovered. Danny decided that he needed to learn more before confronting Henry with his growing list of questions and observations. The rescue of Kyle Brooks had shattered Danny's ability to dismiss the strange things he had noticed about Henry Stone. Over the following weeks, he found himself studying the old janitor with the same intensity he applied to his military training manuals. Every interaction, every movement, every small detail became a piece of evidence in a puzzle that grew more complex with each passing day. Danny began keeping a notebook where he recorded his observations about Henry. The entries started simple, noting times when the old man appeared in different parts of the base and what he was doing. But gradually the observations became more detailed and disturbing as Danny noticed patterns that defied rational explanation. Henry never seemed to be truly tired, even after working long shifts that would exhaust men half his age. While other maintenance workers showed signs of fatigue by the end of their workdays, Henry maintained the same steady energy from morning until night. His movements remained precise and controlled regardless of how much physical labor he had performed. The old man's hearing seemed unusually acute. Danny noticed that Henry would sometimes pause in his work and turn his head as if listening to distant sounds. During these episodes, Henry's expression would become focused and alert, in ways that reminded Danny of soldiers receiving radio communications through earpieces. But Henry never wore any visible communication equipment. Most unsettling were the moments when Henry's eyes would reflect light in ways that seemed almost animal-like. The effect was subtle and only visible from certain angles, but it reminded Danny of the way a cat's eyes would shine when caught by headlights at night. The reflective quality would disappear quickly, making Danny wonder if he was imagining things or if Henry was somehow able to control the effect. Danny also began paying attention to Henry's interactions with the base's electronic systems. Security cameras seemed to malfunction more often when Henry was in their vicinity, developing temporary blind spots or feed problems that would resolve themselves after he moved on. The base's wireless internet would sometimes experience brief interruptions that coincided with Henry's presence in certain buildings. The more evidence Danny collected, the more convinced he became that a direct confrontation was necessary. The mystery was consuming too much of his mental energy and affecting his training performance. He needed answers, even if those answers might be dangerous or impossible to believe. Danny's opportunity came during a late-night study session in the classroom building. It was past midnight, and the base was mostly quiet except for the security patrols and night shift personnel. Danny had been reviewing combat swimming techniques when he heard the familiar sound of Henry's cleaning cart in the hallway outside. Instead of continuing his studies, Danny closed his books and prepared to follow through with a plan he had been developing for days. He waited until Henry entered the classroom and began his usual cleaning routine, then approached the old man with careful, non-threatening movements. "Henry, I need to talk to you about something important," Danny said, keeping his voice low and respectful. The old janitor looked up from the whiteboard he was cleaning, and Danny saw something flicker across his face that looked like resignation mixed with concern. Henry set down his cleaning supplies and turned to face Danny with the patient expression of someone who had been expecting this conversation for some time. "I know what you're going to ask about," Henry said quietly, "and I'm not sure I can give you the answers you're looking for." Danny took a deep breath and decided to be completely direct in his approach. The time for subtle questions and careful observation was over, and he needed to know the truth about what he had witnessed. "You're not human, are you?" Danny asked, the words feeling strange and impossible even as he spoke them. Henry was quiet for a long moment, studying Danny's face with eyes that seemed to be evaluating something far more complex than simple curiosity. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a weight that made the air in the room feel heavier. "What makes you think that?" Henry asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. Danny pulled out his notebook and began listing the observations he had recorded over the past several weeks. The impossible swimming speed during Kyle's rescue, the strange tattoo that seemed to move and respond to light, the way electronics malfunctioned around him, the superhuman endurance, and the dozens of small details that individually might be explained away, but collectively painted a picture of something beyond normal human capability. As Danny spoke, Henry's expression grew more serious and thoughtful. The old man listened without interrupting, occasionally nodding as if confirming details that Danny had observed correctly. When Danny finished his list, Henry was quiet for several minutes, apparently weighing options that Danny could not begin to imagine. "You're very observant," Henry finally said, "and you're right to be concerned about what you've seen." Henry walked to the classroom door and checked the hallway to ensure they were alone. He then returned to where Danny was standing and rolled up his left sleeve, revealing the mysterious tattoo in its full complexity. Under the classroom's fluorescent lights, the design was even more remarkable than Danny had remembered. "This isn't just a tattoo," Henry explained, touching the flowing patterns on his arm. "It's a biotechnological interface that connects me to communication and data networks that span distances you couldn't imagine." Danny stared at the tattoo as symbols within it began to glow more brightly, responding to Henry's touch like a sophisticated computer display projected onto living skin. The geometric patterns shifted and rearranged themselves, displaying what looked like star charts, technical diagrams, and streams of data in languages that were definitely not of human origin. "I am part of an advanced reconnaissance team from an alliance of species that has been observing Earth for several decades," Henry continued, his voice taking on a formal quality that suggested he was sharing information that was normally classified at the highest levels. "My people call ourselves the Coalition, and we have been studying human military capabilities and social development as part of a larger strategic assessment." The revelation hit Danny like a physical blow, even though he had suspected something extraordinary about Henry for weeks. Actually hearing the words spoken aloud made the situation real in ways that his speculation had not prepared him for. He was standing in a military classroom at 2 in the morning, having a conversation with an alien being who had been disguised as a janitor for 15 years. "Why are you telling me this?" Danny asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Shouldn't this kind of information be classified or dangerous to share?" Henry's expression became more serious, and Danny noticed that the old man's eyes were now reflecting the room's fluorescent lights with an unmistakably non-human quality. The effect was no longer subtle or questionable, but clearly visible and deliberately displayed. "Because Earth is running out of time," Henry said simply, "and because after watching humans like you train and develop, I believe your species deserves to know what's coming." Danny felt his pulse quicken as the implications of Henry's words began to sink in. The alien's presence at a military training facility suddenly took on new and ominous significance, suggesting that whatever was coming would require the kind of warriors they were training at the SEAL base. "What's coming?" Danny asked, though part of him was not sure he wanted to hear the answer. Henry touched his tattoo again and new symbols appeared within the design. These looked like tactical displays showing the positions of spacecraft and planetary systems, with moving elements that suggested some kind of military conflict on a scale that spanned star systems. "War," Henry said quietly. "A war that will determine the future of every intelligent species in this part of the galaxy, including humanity." Henry gestured for Danny to sit down in one of the classroom chairs, recognizing that the information he was about to share would be overwhelming for any human to process. The alien's demeanor had completely changed from the humble, quiet janitor Danny had known for months into something that radiated authority and deep knowledge of cosmic events. "The war I'm speaking of has been going on for over 200 years, Henry began, his tattoo displaying what appeared to be a three-dimensional star map, showing vast regions of space. "It started in distant galaxy sectors that your astronomers haven't even discovered yet, but it has been spreading steadily toward this region of the universe." Danny watched in fascination as the symbols on Henry's arm moved and shifted to show the progression of conflict across star systems. Red markers indicated conquered worlds, while blue ones seemed to represent free territories, still under the protection of Henry's coalition. The pattern was disturbing, showing the red areas steadily expanding toward a small blue dot that Danny realized must represent Earth's solar system. "The enemy calls itself the Dominion," Henry continued, touching his tattoo to bring up detailed images of spacecraft and military formations that looked both advanced and threatening. "They are a collection of species that believe in conquest and subjugation as the natural order of the universe. Entire civilizations have been enslaved or destroyed by their expansion." The tactical displays showed massive fleets of ships that dwarfed anything in human science fiction. The vessels were sleek and predatory-looking, designed with obvious military purposes that spoke of a civilization built entirely around warfare and domination. Support screens showed ground forces, weapons systems, and planetary bombardment capabilities that could reduce Earth's entire military to ashes in a matter of hours. "Why haven't they come here already?" Danny asked, his voice tight with concern as he tried to comprehend the scale of the threat Henry was describing. "Distance and priorities," Henry replied, adjusting the star map to show travel routes and strategic considerations. "Earth is located in what the Dominion considers a remote frontier region with limited strategic value. They have been focused on conquering more important systems with larger populations and better resources, but that situation is changing." Henry's tattoo displayed new information showing resource surveys and population assessments that had apparently been conducted throughout the galaxy. Earth scored relatively low on most measures of immediate value, but there were indicators that suggested the planet's strategic importance was increasing as the war progressed. "Earth's location makes it a potential staging area for military operations in this entire sector of the galaxy," Henry explained. "As the Dominion consolidates their control over the more valuable systems, they will eventually need to secure frontier regions like this one to prevent coalition forces from using them as bases for counterattacks." Danny studied the tactical situation displayed on Henry's arm, using his military training to understand the strategic implications. Earth was positioned like a small island that might be ignored during the early phases of a naval war, but would become critically important once the major battles moved to this region of the ocean. "How long do we have?" Danny asked, though he suspected the answer would not be comforting. Coalition intelligence estimates that the Dominion will arrive in this solar system within 2 years, Henry said, his expression grave as he shared information that represented a death sentence for human civilization, unless something dramatic changed. Their advanced scouts have already begun surveying this region of space, and preliminary invasion fleets are being assembled in captured systems about 50 light-years from here. The timeline was terrifyingly short. 2 years was barely enough time for Earth's governments to begin preparing for a conventional war, let alone a conflict against an enemy with technology that was centuries ahead of human capabilities. Danny realized that Henry's presence at the SEAL training base suddenly made perfect sense from a strategic perspective. "You're here to evaluate whether humans are worth saving," Danny said, the pieces of the puzzle finally coming together in his mind. Henry nodded slowly, and Danny saw something like respect flicker across the alien's features. "The Coalition has limited resources and many threatened species to protect. We cannot save everyone, so we must make difficult choices about which civilizations are most likely to survive and contribute to the war effort." The cold calculation involved in such decisions was sobering, but Danny understood the logic from a military perspective. In any conflict with limited resources, commanders had to prioritize their efforts based on realistic assessments of what could be accomplished. The Coalition was apparently applying the same principles on a galactic scale. "What criteria do you use to make those decisions?" Danny asked, genuinely curious about how an advanced alien civilization would evaluate humanity's potential. Henry's tattoo displayed new information that appeared to be evaluation reports and assessment data collected over decades of observation. The screens showed human military conflicts, technological development, social structures, and psychological profiles that had been analyzed in tremendous detail. Military capability is obviously important, but it's not the primary factor, Henry explained, highlighting sections of the assessment data. "The Dominion has superior technology and numbers, so any species that joins the Coalition must bring something else to the Alliance. Usually that means specialized knowledge, unique resources, or exceptional fighting qualities that can't be easily replaced." Danny noticed that much of the data focused on human behavior during extreme stress situations, psychological resilience, and performance in hopeless combat scenarios. The Coalition had apparently been studying how humans responded to overwhelming odds and impossible challenges. "We have been particularly interested in what our analysts call the human factor," Henry continued, bringing up psychological profiles and performance statistics that showed remarkable patterns. "Humans display a level of determination and refusal to surrender that is extremely rare among intelligent species." The data was impressive even to Danny, who had grown up around military culture and was familiar with stories of human persistence in desperate situations. But seeing it quantified and compared to other species made him realize that what humans considered normal behavior was apparently exceptional on a galactic scale. "Most intelligent species are logical enough to surrender when faced with impossible odds," Henry explained. "They calculate survival probabilities and make rational decisions to preserve their civilizations through negotiation or submission. Humans consistently refuse to follow this pattern, even when continued resistance seems completely futile." Danny thought about his own SEAL training and the countless stories of human military history where soldiers had fought against overwhelming odds simply because surrender was not acceptable. The idea that this psychological trait was unusual among intelligent species was both surprising and encouraging. "The Coalition has observed this behavior throughout human history," Henry continued, displaying historical examples that showed patterns of resistance and determination spanning thousands of years. From ancient battles to modern conflicts, humans consistently choose to fight rather than submit, even when fighting means almost certain death. The implications were starting to become clear to Danny. In a galactic war against an enemy that expected conquered species to submit logically to superior force, humanity's irrational refusal to give up could be a significant strategic advantage. Human soldiers might continue fighting in situations where other species would surrender, potentially disrupting Dominion plans that assumed rational behavior from defeated enemies. "But there are other factors to consider," Henry said, his expression becoming more serious. "Humans are also aggressive, unpredictable, and difficult to control. Some Coalition members worry that providing advanced technology to your species could create new problems that are worse than the original threat. Danny realized that humanity was being evaluated not just as potential allies, but as potential threats to the coalition itself. The same psychological traits that made humans valuable in war could also make them dangerous partners in peace. Henry's tattoo shifted to display detailed psychological profiles and behavioral analyses that represented decades of careful study. Danny found himself looking at data that revealed intimate details about human nature from an alien perspective, seeing his own species through eyes that had observed countless civilizations across the galaxy. The coalition has identified several traits that make humans unique among the intelligent species we have encountered, Henry continued, highlighting specific sections of the analysis. Your adaptability is remarkable. Most species develop along predictable technological and social paths, but humans consistently find unexpected solutions to problems that should be impossible to solve. The data showed examples from human history where technological limitations had been overcome through creative thinking and unconventional approaches. Military innovations, scientific breakthroughs, and social developments that had surprised even coalition observers who thought they understood human capabilities. During your Second World War, coalition analysts predicted that the conflict would end in specific ways based on technological and numerical advantages, Henry explained, bringing up detailed projections that had apparently been proven wrong by actual events. Human ingenuity and determination repeatedly altered outcomes that should have been predetermined by superior resources. Danny studied the military analyses displayed on Henry's arm, recognizing famous battles and campaigns where human forces had achieved victories that seemed impossible based on purely logical calculations. The alien perspective made these historical events seem even more remarkable than human. Historians had portrayed them, but the most significant factor is something we call psychological resilience. Under extreme stress, Henry said, displaying brain scans and psychological profiles that showed human mental patterns during crisis situations. When most intelligent species face overwhelming threats, their cognitive functions begin to deteriorate as survival instincts take over. Humans actually perform better under extreme pressure. The scientific data was fascinating and disturbing at the same time. Charts showed that human problem-solving abilities, creativity, and tactical thinking actually improved when death seemed certain and hope was nearly gone. Other species showed the opposite pattern, becoming less effective as stress levels increased. This trait appears to be connected to your species' evolutionary history, Henry continued, bringing up comparative studies that showed how different environments had shaped the psychology of various intelligent races. Humans evolved on a planet with unusual environmental challenges and predatory pressures that required constant adaptation and survival responses. Earth was apparently considered an unusually hostile environment by galactic standards. The combination of natural disasters, climate variations, dangerous animals, and resource limitations had created selection pressures that were rare on most worlds where intelligent life had developed. Humans had evolved psychological traits that were optimized for survival in conditions that would break most other species. The Dominion has conquered hundreds of civilizations, and they have developed standard procedures for breaking the will of conquered populations, Henry explained, displaying what appeared to be enemy tactical manuals and psychological warfare techniques. These methods are extremely effective against most species, but our projections suggest they would be largely ineffective against humans. The enemy techniques relied on logical demonstrations of futility, calculated displays of overwhelming force, and rational appeals to survival instincts. But humans consistently responded to such approaches with increased determination rather than submission, creating problems for occupation, forces that expected conquered populations to behave logically. There are historical examples of human populations that have continued to resist for generations, under conditions that should have broken their will completely, Henry said, showing data from various human conflicts and resistance movements. This pattern is almost unknown among other intelligent species. Danny thought about resistance movements throughout human history, from ancient rebellions to modern guerrilla warfare. The idea that such persistent resistance was unusual on a galactic scale made him proud of his species, even as it highlighted the massive challenges they would face against a technologically superior enemy. But these advantages come with serious risks, Henry continued. his expression becoming more concerned as he displayed different types of analysis data. Human aggression and territorial instincts are also extreme by galactic standards. Most coalition members worry about what humans might do with advanced technology once the immediate threat is resolved. The psychological profiles showed that humans scored far higher than most species on measures of aggression, territorial competition, and willingness to use violence to resolve conflicts. While these traits were valuable in war, they suggested that humanity might become a threat to other coalition members once the Dominion was defeated. Some coalition leaders believed that helping humanity survive would simply create a new enemy that might be worse than the Dominion in the long term, Henry explained. They argue that human expansion into space would inevitably lead to conflicts with other species as you compete for resources and territory. Danny realized that humanity was facing a complex political situation within the coalition. Even if they proved capable of fighting effectively against the Dominion, there was no guarantee that other species would welcome humans as permanent allies. The same traits that made humans valuable in war could make them unwelcome in peace. What do you think? Danny asked, curious about Henry's personal assessment after years of observation. Henry was quiet for several moments, apparently considering his response carefully. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of someone who had wrestled with difficult questions that had no easy answers. I think humans are dangerous, Henry said honestly, but I also think they are necessary. The Dominion represents an existential threat to every free species in the galaxy, and conventional military approaches have not been sufficient to stop their expansion. Henry's tattoo displayed strategic analyses showing the overall progress of the galactic war. Despite superior technology and coordinated resistance efforts, the coalition was slowly losing ground to the Dominion's relentless expansion. Traditional military wisdom and logical tactical approaches were proving inadequate against an enemy that had perfected the art of conquest. We need allies who think differently, who will try approaches that seem impossible or irrational, Henry continued. Human unpredictability and refusal to accept defeat might be exactly what the coalition needs to break the strategic deadlock. The tactical situation displayed on Henry's arm showed multiple scenarios where unconventional human approaches might disrupt enemy plans that assumed rational behavior from coalition forces. Surprise attacks, desperate defensive stands, and seemingly suicidal missions that might actually succeed because the Dominion would not expect such irrational tactics. The question is whether humanity can be trusted with the power necessary to make a real difference in this war, Henry said, bringing up projections showing what human forces might accomplish with access to coalition technology and resources. Advanced weapons, faster than light travel, and planetary defense systems would make humans a formidable military force, but they would also make you a potential threat to everyone else. Danny understood the dilemma from both perspectives. The coalition needed allies who could think and fight in ways that would surprise the Dominion, but they also needed to ensure that those allies would not become future enemies. Humanity's psychological traits were both their greatest asset and their most dangerous liability. How is this decision going to be made? Danny asked, realizing that the fate of his entire species might depend on political negotiations and strategic assessments that were completely beyond human influence. That depends partly on my final report, Henry said, his expression indicating the enormous responsibility he carried. I have been documenting human military capabilities, psychological traits, and social development for 15 years. My recommendations will carry significant weight with the Coalition Council. Danny felt the full impact of that revelation. The quiet janitor he had been observing for months was actually an alien agent whose assessment could determine whether humanity received the help they needed to survive the coming war. Everything Henry had witnessed at the SEAL training base, every interaction with human military personnel, and every observation of human behavior under stress was being evaluated as evidence in a cosmic trial that would decide humanity's future. The weight of Henry's revelation settled over Danny like a physical burden as he realized that everything he had witnessed over the past months had been part of an evaluation that could determine the survival of human civilization. The aliens' assessment would help decide whether humanity received the technology and support needed to face the Dominion, or whether Earth would be left to face the invasion alone. When do you have to submit your final report? Danny asked, his voice tight with concern about the timeline involved in such a momentous decision. "Within the next few weeks," Henry replied, his tattoo displaying what appeared to be a countdown timer, showing the remaining time before his mission deadline. "The Coalition Council is meeting to finalize alliance decisions for this sector of the galaxy, and they need my assessment before they can vote on humanity's status." Danny felt a surge of desperation as he realized how little time remained for humanity to prove their worth as potential allies. Everything that mattered for the future of his species would be decided by a group of alien beings based on observations of military training, exercises, and cultural analysis conducted by a single undercover agent. "What can I do to help?" Danny asked, though he was not sure what one SEAL recruit could accomplish in such a short time frame. Henry studied Danny's face for several moments, apparently evaluating something that went beyond the young man's military training or physical capabilities. When he spoke, his voice carried a note of hope that had not been present during their previous discussions about the galactic situation. "There might be something," Henry said slowly, his tattoo displaying new information that appeared to be communication protocols and tactical planning documents. "The Coalition Council has authorized me to conduct a final demonstration of human potential under controlled conditions. If I can provide compelling evidence of your species' unique capabilities, it might influence their decision." Danny leaned forward, eager to understand what kind of demonstration might be possible and how he could contribute to proving humanity's value as allies. The opportunity to actively influence his species' fate was both exciting and terrifying. "What kind of demonstration?" Danny asked. Henry touched his tattoo to bring up detailed schematics and training scenarios that looked far more advanced than anything Danny had encountered during his SEAL preparation. The displays showed obstacle courses, combat simulations, and problem-solving challenges that incorporated technology and conditions that were clearly not of human origin. "I have access to Coalition training, equipment, and scenario generators that can create realistic simulations of combat situations your species will face if you join our alliance," Henry explained. "These tests are designed to evaluate psychological resilience, tactical adaptability, and performance under stress levels that exceed anything possible with human technology." The training scenarios displayed on Henry's arm looked like something from an advanced science fiction movie, featuring environments and challenges that would push human capabilities far beyond anything they had experienced before. Danny could see immediately that such tests would provide much more compelling evidence about human potential than observations of standard military training. "I would need a small team of volunteers who could participate in these demonstrations without revealing the true nature of what they were experiencing," Henry continued. "The Coalition requires that first contact protocols be maintained until official alliance decisions are made. So the human participants would need to believe they were involved in some kind of classified military exercise." Danny understood the complexity of the situation. Henry needed to demonstrate human capabilities under extreme conditions, but he could not reveal the alien nature of the technology being used without violating Coalition policies about contact with primitive civilizations. The demonstration would have to be designed to look like an advanced human military exercise. "I can help you select the right people," Danny said, his mind already working through the psychological profiles of his fellow recruits to identify candidates who would perform well under extraordinary circumstances. "But I would need to know more about what these tests involve and what you're specifically trying to demonstrate." Henry's tattoo shifted to display detailed psychological criteria and performance metrics that would be measured during the demonstration. The tests were designed to evaluate exactly the traits that made humans unique among galactic civilizations: adaptability, persistence under impossible odds, and creative problem-solving when conventional approaches failed. The scenarios will present challenges that appear completely hopeless based on available resources and tactical situation, Henry explained. Most intelligent species respond to such scenarios by attempting to negotiate, surrender, or find logical escape routes. We need to document how humans respond when all rational options have been eliminated. Danny realized that Henry was essentially asking him to help prove that humans were irrational enough to be valuable allies. The irony was not lost on him, but he understood the strategic logic behind the demonstration. In a war against an enemy that expected rational behavior, humanity's tendency toward seemingly suicidal persistence could be a significant advantage. Who would be the best candidates for this kind of test? Henry asked, bringing up personnel files that showed he had been observing and evaluating all the recruits in Danny's training class. Danny considered the question carefully, thinking about which of his fellow recruits would best represent humanity's potential, while also being psychologically stable enough to handle whatever extraordinary challenges Henry might present. The selection would be crucial, as the performance of a few individuals could determine the fate of the entire species. Lisa Park would be excellent, Danny said, thinking about the female recruit who had consistently demonstrated exceptional determination and creative thinking during their training. She never gives up even when the situation seems impossible, and she has a talent for finding solutions that others miss. Henry nodded and highlighted Lisa's file, which showed performance data that supported Danny's assessment. The alien had clearly been watching all the recruits closely and had his own opinions about their capabilities and psychological profiles. Jake Murphy is another good choice, Danny continued. He's not the strongest or fastest recruit, but he has incredible mental toughness and he performs better under pressure than anyone else I've seen. Danny went through several more candidates, explaining the psychological traits and performance characteristics that made each person suitable for Henry's demonstration. As they discussed the selection process, Danny began to understand that he was essentially choosing representatives for a test that could determine whether humanity would survive the next few years. There's one more thing, Henry said, his expression becoming more serious as he prepared to share additional information. These demonstrations will be monitored directly by coalition observers who will be evaluating not just the performance data, but also the human responses to impossible situations. The stakes could not be higher. Danny felt a chill as he realized that alien beings would be watching and judging human performance in real time. The demonstration would not just be a test of human capabilities, but a live audition for species survival performed in front of an audience that would decide humanity's fate, based on what they witnessed. When do we start? Danny asked, knowing that despite the enormous pressure and responsibility involved, this might be humanity's only chance to prove they deserve to survive the coming war. Henry touched his tattoo one final time, and new displays appeared showing a timeline for the demonstration that would begin within days. The countdown to humanity's cosmic trial had begun, and everything would depend on how well a small group of SEAL recruits could perform, under conditions that would challenge the limits of human endurance and determination. 3 days later, Danny found himself standing in a section of the training base that he had never seen before. Henry had led him and the selected recruits through a series of security doors and underground corridors to a facility that appeared to have been constructed using technology far beyond anything in the human military arsenal. The team Danny had assembled consisted of Lisa Park, Jake Murphy, and Carlos Vega, 3 recruits who represented the best of human determination and adaptability. Henry had briefed them on what they believed was a classified training exercise designed to test new combat simulation technology, carefully concealing the true nature of the demonstration they were about to undertake. The underground facility was larger than Danny had expected, with chambers and corridors that seemed to extend far beyond what should have been possible, given the base's surface layout. The walls were constructed from materials that looked both familiar and alien, smooth surfaces that seemed to absorb light and sound in ways that created an unsettling atmosphere. This exercise will test your abilities under conditions that exceed anything you have experienced during standard training, Henry explained to the group, his voice taking on the formal tone of a military instructor. The scenarios you will face are designed to simulate combat situations that may become reality in future conflicts. Danny noticed that Henry's usual janitor uniform had been replaced by clothing that looked more appropriate for a senior military advisor. The transformation was subtle but significant, suggesting that the alien was dropping his cover identity for the duration of the demonstration. The first challenge took place in a chamber that could apparently reconfigure itself to simulate different environments and tactical situations. When the team entered the room, they found themselves in what appeared to be a hostile alien landscape, with terrain and atmospheric conditions unlike anything on Earth. The scenario was brutally simple in its complexity. They were tasked with rescuing simulated hostages from a fortified position while facing overwhelming enemy forces that possessed superior technology and tactical advantages. The obvious approaches were blocked by obstacles that seemed designed to make success impossible through conventional military tactics. Danny watched his teammates respond to the impossible situation with exactly the kind of determination that Henry had described as uniquely human. Instead of attempting to negotiate or find escape routes, Lisa immediately began analyzing the enemy position for weaknesses that might be exploited through unconventional approaches. Jake focused on the team's limited resources, looking for ways to use their equipment in combinations that had not been intended by the designers. His creative thinking produced solutions that transformed disadvantages into tactical advantages through sheer ingenuity and willingness to take enormous risks. Carlos demonstrated the psychological resilience that made humans valuable in desperate situations. When their initial plans failed and the tactical situation became even more hopeless, he actually became more focused and effective rather than surrendering to despair or panic. The team's performance during the first scenario exceeded even Danny's expectations. They succeeded in completing an objective that should have been impossible, using tactics that combined human creativity with a refusal to accept defeat that impressed even Henry's alien perspective. But the demonstration was just beginning. Henry led them through a series of increasingly difficult challenges that tested every aspect of human capability under extreme stress. Each scenario was designed to break the team's will and force them to surrender or retreat. But the recruits continued to find ways to adapt and overcome obstacles that would have stopped most other species. During the third scenario, something unexpected happened that changed the entire nature of the demonstration. Alarms began sounding throughout the facility as Henry's tattoo suddenly blazed with urgent communications from his coalition contacts. Dominion scouts have arrived in the outer solar system ahead of schedule, Henry announced, his calm demeanor replaced by obvious concern as he processed the incoming intelligence. This is no longer a simulation. Danny felt his world shift as the implications of Henry's statement became clear. The enemy that threatened human civilization had arrived years earlier than expected, and the demonstration that was supposed to prove humanity's worth had suddenly become a real combat situation. Henry's tattoo displayed tactical information, showing the positions of alien spacecraft that had entered the solar system and were conducting reconnaissance operations around Earth. The scout ships were small but represented the advance elements of an invasion force that could arrive at any time. The Coalition Council is demanding immediate intelligence about human defensive capabilities, Henry explained, his alien nature now completely revealed as he coordinated with unseen allies through his biotechnological interface. Your performance in these scenarios has become critical intelligence that will determine whether humanity receives emergency military assistance. The revelation that their training exercise had become a real test with immediate consequences for Earth's survival galvanized the team in ways that no simulation could have accomplished. Danny watched his teammates transform from tired recruits into focused warriors as they realized that everything they did from this moment forward could determine the fate of human civilization. The final scenario was the most challenging yet, requiring the team to coordinate with Henry in planning defensive strategies that could be implemented on a planetary scale. The alien's true nature was now completely revealed, but instead of being intimidated or confused by his non-human identity, the recruits accepted him as an ally and adapted their thinking to incorporate his advanced knowledge and capabilities. Danny realized that this acceptance was itself a demonstration of human adaptability that would impress coalition observers. Most species required extensive preparation and psychological conditioning before they could work effectively with alien allies. But humans were apparently capable of immediate cooperation when circumstances demanded it. The team's final performance combined all the traits that made humans unique among galactic civilizations. They refused to surrender despite impossible odds, found creative solutions to problems that should have had no answers, and demonstrated psychological resilience that allowed them to function effectively even when facing the potential extinction of their species. When the demonstration concluded, Henry's tattoo displayed communication from coalition observers who had been monitoring every aspect of the team's performance. Danny could not understand the alien language being used, but Henry's expression suggested that the evaluation had been successful. The Coalition Council has voted to offer humanity full alliance status with immediate effect, Henry announced, his voice carrying relief and satisfaction as he shared the decision that would determine Earth's future. Your species will receive advanced defensive technology, military advisors, and support in preparing for the Dominion invasion. The transformation of the underground facility began immediately, as coalition equipment and personnel materialized through transportation methods that defied human understanding of physics. Danny watched alien beings appear in the chamber, bringing technology and knowledge that would give humanity a fighting chance against the coming invasion. Henry's role changed again as he transitioned from undercover observer to official liaison between humanity and the coalition. The quiet janitor who had cleaned their training facility for 15 years was revealed as a senior intelligence officer whose assessment had determined the fate of an entire species. Over the following weeks, the SEAL training base became the first official contact point between humanity and the galactic community. Danny and his teammates found themselves serving as the initial human representatives in an alliance that would transform their species from an isolated, planetary civilization into active participants in a war that spanned the galaxy. The final scene showed Henry, still working around the base but now openly wearing his biotechnological tattoo, and coordinating between human and alien military personnel. The quiet old man had become the bridge between two species, and humanity had taken its first steps toward proving that they deserved a place among the stars, as defenders of freedom against those who would enslave the galaxy.